Sukhi Hotu. A very good morning to Professor Tilakaratana and our audience. Welcome back. We are going to conduct a dialogue session which is under the BMB Dhamma series, number 10. We have been having very great, interesting discussions with different scholars, scholarly practitioners, and professionals for the last probably year and a half. And today's discussion is going to be very interesting as well. We are going to look at Paticca Samuppada from a very valuable aspect. Our topic today is going to be how can we apply dependent origination, Paticca Samuppada, to improve our daily lives. Once again, Professor Tilakaratana, welcome to Buddhist Maha Vihara, and my name is Bhante, Dr. Chandima. Professor Tilakaratana does not need a very lengthy introduction, but definitely for the Malaysian audience and the audience who are coming to this temple might not know him perhaps, so I would like to introduce him with a short bio. First of all, I want to say that he is the Emeritus Professor at the Department of Buddhist Studies in the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. To see some of the areas of his bio, Dr. Asanga Tilakaratana, Emeritus Professor of Buddhist Studies, is Senior Chair Professor of Pali and Buddhist Studies and founder, Head of the Department of Buddhist Studies at University of Colombo. He not only worked, he is the one who started, I think, initiated, pioneered this department. I think it's probably from 2009 until he retired in 2018. During 2003 and 2006, he also served as the Director of Postgraduate Institute of Pali and Buddhist Studies, University of Kelaniya, a very iconic and landmark of Buddhist studies in Sri Lanka, where many local and foreign students came to Sri Lanka and then studied in English medium compared to many other institutions at that time. Now there are many institutions that are providing these things. And he has published widely. Among the very interesting works, we can see that he published his Sri Lankan Sinhalese work a long time ago, 1970s?
Yeah, that's 79.
1979,
yes.
He published this book called Minis Gatalu Pilibanda Bauddha Vigraha, Buddhist Analysis of Human Matters, wherein which he was able to get
human problems in
human
Buddhist
problems
perspective.
In a Buddhist perspective. And he was also awarded probably
a
state literary award at that time. Yeah. In 1999 to 2000, Professor Tilakaratana was a senior Commonwealth Fellow and was attached to Oriental Institute, Oxford University. He has served as visiting professor at many universities: Yonsei University, Korea, Otago, New Zealand, Savitribai Phule, Pune University, India, Somaya Vidya Vihar, Mumbai, Sitagu International Buddhist Academy, Myanmar, Nalanda University, India, and many places, in many institutions. Of his more recent academic works, Theravada Buddhism, The View of the Elders, 2012, was published by University of Hawaii Press in the series of Dimensions of Asian Spirituality. He also co-edited with Professor Oliver Benayaka this book, 2,600 Years of Sambuddhatva, Global Journey of Awakening, in 2012. A work covering the history and the current status of global Buddhism of all three traditions. Among the other very notable contributions Professor Tilakaratana has done is slabs. These slabs, I think we understand UCABs, UK Association of Buddhist Studies is similar to that, but
it's a Sri Lankan
counterpart of UCABs. In 2002, he founded Sri Lanka Association of Buddhist Studies, an academic and professional organization of Buddhist scholars in Sri Lanka, and continues to serve as its joint secretary. This is a place where all the scholars, Buddhist scholars, and maybe other scholars about Buddhism got together and shared their researches. In 2003, he founded with a group of academics and professionals Dhamma Review Foundation, a government-registered non-profit voluntary organization for economic, social, educational, and spiritual development, and continues to function as its founder chairman. I think this is more toward for the secular
social
well-being,
services.
social services. He not only contributed to academic studies, but also he is continuing to help out these humanitarian aspects too. Finally, he served as the editor-in-chief of Encyclopedia of Buddhism, Ministry of Buddha Sasana and Religious Affairs, Government of Sri Lanka, from 2019 to 2023. And as of now, he has published both in Sinhala and English more than 20 books and 100 papers. That's a big number. His collected works in 8 volumes were published in 2021 in Colombo. We hope that Buddhist Maha Vihara will be able to acquire a set of copies of these 8 volumes. All right. So, Professor Tilakaratana, if we look at, first of all, I want to say once again, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you.
And do you have anything to share about your experience so far at Buddhist Mahavihara? You came here a couple days ago.
Yes. Actually, my first visit to this Vihara was in early 1980s, long time ago. And then when Venerable Kirinde Dhammananda was very much active here. So, but then several decades passed, my, not visiting here, not passing this way. So I'm glad that this time I'm here and, share some of my views and ideas and experience with the people.
Yeah. That's very interesting, and thank you for making that decision to come here. All right. Professor Tilakaratana, now Paticca Samuppada, dependent origination or dependent co-arising, there are many English translations for that.
Right.
This has been a very hardcore teaching for many, I would say, practitioners, probably normal devotees who are coming to the center. Now we are approaching devotees, scholarly practitioners, scholars in this discussion. I wonder, how are we supposed to look at Paticca in the first place?
Right. Okay, Venerable. Actually, I remember at one point, Venerable Ananda indicates to the Buddha that he understands Paticca very well and without much effort. At that point, Buddha said to Venerable Ananda, don't say so. It is a profound, difficult doctrine. I think we know that Venerable Ananda was not an ordinary person. He was with great erudition and memory and wisdom. And for such a disciple of the Buddha to think in that manner and the Buddha to correct him, saying that, no, don't say so, it is a profound, difficult teaching, I think it gives an idea. Now, when we look at it kind of outside, superficially, I think we get that type of feeling that, okay, what it is. I mean, everybody talks about causality. Basically, the principle is causality. And in today, science, that is the main idea. So, we get the impression, we understand this. But however, I think Buddha's remark has to be taken seriously because this doctrine tries to capture the very intricate relationship among things and phenomena ultimately related to human life. Now, in generally, we see that Buddhism propounds a theory of causality. However, that theory is not caused causality per se. This particular use Paticca Samuppada, in Sanskrit Pratitya Samutpada, which we translate into English as dependent origination or dependent co-origination. I think Venerable Chandima captures this depth of the concept rather than calling it causality, which is usually understood as A causing B, B causing C, C causing D. And in that manner, I think this whole concept being articulated as dependent origination, Paticcasamuppada. I think Venerable Chandima, it is correct to say that this was one of the terms that's unique to Buddhist teaching. You don't find this teaching. Now, when we talk about Buddhist philosophy, we usually refer to pre-Buddhist philosophical views and also what are called Shat Darshana, 6 philosophical systems. But the causality, the concept of cause and effect is very much there. But this is the particular way the Buddha articulated that relationship. So if somebody asks from me, okay, what is dependent origination, I would specify it as Buddhist concept of causality or the way of Buddhist articulation of causality. So that basically that is the idea.
Yeah.
Now, another interesting thing would be, now in our day-to-day understanding of Dhamma and understanding of discussions, we think we place Paticcasamuppada among other doctrines, okay, 4 Noble Truths, 8-fold Path, 3 characteristics, and so on. I think there is a basic mistake there, because Paticcasamuppada is a theory, if I may use that language, Buddhist theory of reality. Now, if you take 4 Noble Truths, it consists both theory and practice. And then if you take 8 Noble Path, it is purely practice. And then if you take 3 Siddhata, Anicca Dukkha Anatta, it articulates nature of reality. Now, when we take Paticcasamuppada, I don't think, Venerable, it is one of those things to be practiced or anything. I think it is the theory or the explanation behind the Buddhist doctrine. For example, if you take 4 Noble Truths, we have suffering, and then Buddha articulates how suffering arises, and then nirvana, and then how can we reach nirvana. If you look at this, there is a structure. Now, structure resembles cause and effect. Dukkha is the effect, craving is the cause. And then, of course, traditionally we don't put nirvana to be an effect of anything, but basically, if you practice the 8 Noble Path, then you achieve nirvana. So, even within 4 Noble Truths doctrine, I think the underlying theory, explanation, is dependent origination. So this is basically how I would like to look at it.
Interesting. Now, the next question I would like to ask you is that I think there are a lot of people out there who might not know what is the basic importance of Paticcasamuppada.
Right.
I mean, we are not going to look at everything at this point, not going to talk about all the benefits. Can you just give a very short idea, why should people need to learn Paticcasamuppada? Why?
Okay. Now, thank you, Venerable, for that question. Now, we know that Paticcasamuppada is, the fundamental teaching in Buddhism. And then if you take later philosophers like Nagarjuna, who considered it to be the Madhyamaka, central teaching of Buddhism. The reason is this, actually the dependent origination, Paticca, dependent, Sang, Utpada, arising. Now with this, traditionally we describe how suffering arises in human beings. So then we start in Pali, avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnana, and so on. Then finally, that part is concluded with evametassa kevalassa dukkakhandassa samudayo hoti. In this manner, the entire mass of suffering arises. So that is what is called paticca samuppada. However, the second aspect of that particular teaching is nirodha. Evametassa kevalassa dukkakhandassa nirodho hoti. In the same manner, the entire mass of suffering will be ceased. So usually we talk about paticca samuppada, but we don't talk about paticca nirodha. But actually both samuppada, rising, and also cessation dependently arisen. Now, what is the meaning of dependent arisen? Now, for example, Venerable, this issue of human suffering has been a perennial problem for human life, because people were, the day they started reflecting on their life, they have been concerned about their own nature of their existence. So when they notice that it is really fraught with difficulties, they look for why. So then we know that there were traditional theories. Okay, your suffering was caused by, for example, some kind of almighty God, or your suffering was caused by nature which is beyond you, or because of your own karmic forces, and so on. Now, amidst all these things, Buddha wanted to show that our own suffering, how it arises due to complex whole series of causes and conditions. So therefore, Paticcasamuppada is basically Buddhist explanation of how human suffering arises. And then we know that only explaining how it arises would not do. So also you have to explain how you can get rid of that. Now, this is the very interesting thing. I remember when Buddha was practicing to attain enlightenment, we know that story. He was practicing with 5 of his early friends, and then these early friends left the Buddha when Buddha adopted some kind of the moderate, decent life of taking a meal, and because he gave up this Atthakilamatthana yoga, self-mortificatory practice, and then they left the Buddha, and then he alone strived and meditated and finally attained Buddhahood. Interesting thing is, when he looked at the world, to whom to teach, finally he decided he should go back to his old friends. And Venerable Chandima, the very important thing I see in that whole encounter is, we know the story, they were thinking, okay, he is coming back to us having failed, and so on. But then the Buddha's first statement, expression was, Amatang bhikkhave adhigatang. I mean, this is tremendously important. Amatang adhigatang. I realize deathlessness. Now, we know that by that Buddha never meant some kind of world or place everlastingly you live happily forever. Not that. When Buddha said that Amatang adhigatang, I realized deathlessness, actually this fear of death. Now, why I bring that point here is, Venerable, when the Buddha taught Paticcasamuppada, actually that is that existential grave state of human affairs. Ultimately, whatever we do, when we think about the perspective of death lying over there, I mean, all your fun is gone, all your
efforts are going to be.
And then Buddha wanted to teach us, okay, you look at the death, be aware of your death, but still you be happy. So this was really the conquest of happiness for Buddha. So I think, Venerable, the important thing is, ultimately Buddha wanted to show that how to get rid of this samsaric suffering, how to win it, but not promising some kind of blissful land where you will be living ever after. But Buddha realized that, okay, if you go for bhava, existence, then of course it has to be ended with suffering. So some kind of, the state of mind where, you are not, the afflicted with suffering is that nirvanic state of mind. So I think this is the very basic idea of Buddhism. So this suffering arises. Now if you look at the dependent origination statement, avidya paccaya sankhara. It is the ignorance, not knowing the Four Noble Truths. Sankhara means physical, verbal, and mental actions. So I think, this particular thing, sankhara, although another term popularly used is karma or kamma, Pali karma, Sanskrit. However, here, the word sankhara is used as a very, in a way, one sense deep, and at the same time, very general term. When you say sanskara, we construct things. We construct things mentally, physically, verbally. And it is due to these constructions that everything happens. I mean, if human beings are just idling, not doing anything, no world, no nothing, right? But this entire world, outside world we see, and our own lives, and our community's life, everything is human action. So both suffering and happiness and everything is human action. So in such a situation, my understanding is Buddha shows that, so this avidya, sankhara, this relationship has to be understood, and you have to direct your actions in such a way, at some point your sansaric journey is not prolonged any longer. However, at the same time, it is very important to understand, if we want the world to go on, we need sanskaras. But Buddhist analysis is ultimately, when we say avidya paccaya sankhara, so it is our ignorance, due to that the kind of thing we are doing, this kind of thing. So it goes sankhara paccaya vijnana, namarupa, salayatana, how human experience, and how that human experience causes suffering, jati, jara, marana. I'm giving it very briefly. Now
we will get into them later.
Yes.
Actually.
So the whole idea is that it can be explained in the sansaric term, what happens this life, past life, present life, and also future life. That is one way of explaining it. However, our immediate experience also can be understood in the same manner. Now, I see something works in my mind, I get attracted to it, or I get hostile about it. Now there you can see the sanskara rising out of avidya, and finally I become a miserable person. Or if I see something very attractive and then I get attracted to it, I try to own it, I try to get it, and then again finally I get frustrated. So in either way, ultimately you end up in suffering. So I think, so in the macro manner, in a more universal sense, we can explain it, and also it can be explained with reference to the present moment, the life you are living. So Venerable, I think this is basically what the Buddha wanted to say, that look, ultimately, this is how your own suffering arises. So if you get rid of avidya, ignorance, and then how it gradually causes. So ultimately, the fundamental and the main purpose of the Buddha's teaching is to explain how suffering arises and ceases within human being according to causes and conditions, and the causes and conditions understood in the correct manner. However, today, what is something very interesting is not only this larger problem of human suffering, I would say, according to Buddhism, everything is explained according to Patissamuppada. So in that sense, not only our sansaric suffering, our minor, sometimes petty, day-to-day problems, starting from there, even going to the natural and so-called international problems, we can understand through this doctrine.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you for busting the misperception misconception as well that Paticamuppada is only something that is hardcore and only relevant to someone who is attaining Nibbana. I think, as you said, this is very relevant to day-to-day life.
Right.
Not even to understand how suffering arises, but also how happiness arises.
Exactly.
I think that's the point we have to highlight as well, because now there is a certain misperception about the Four Noble Truths. Why Buddhists are always talking about suffering.
Right.
Where is happiness?
Yeah.
And then so by understanding the 12 parts of the Paticamuppada, can people find happiness? I mean, secular, transcendental happiness.
Right. Actually, I think, again, now this particular 12 aspect formula describes how human suffering arises, I would say, in a deep psychological sense. But if you take it as a whole, as a concept, what it says is things do not happen without causes and conditions. Things do happen with causes and conditions. Now these causes and conditions, of course we can say, again in a philosophical point, we can say the cause of everything. We can posit some kind of, in the Eastern concept is Ishvara, or some kind of, the divine being who is responsible for it. Now, without getting into any of these things, simply Buddha says that finally, in order to understand your suffering, in whatever level, you have to look at yourself. So ultimately, this Paticamuppada formula, avidya, ignorance, is a venerable state of mind. It is not something lying over there outside. So the whole thing is being described with reference to human psychology, human mind. Now, when I say that, you could object. You say, in a manner, you could say that, well, how can it be? Does that mean that all the problems lying in society are originating, it's a psychological or subjective thing? What about the objective factors? Actually, this is very interesting. There are factors in the world. There are factors outside human beings. However, according to Buddhism, all these things come and get together and join together to produce human suffering because of our own decision making, right? So the external world is there. External conditions of the external world are there. And then, but how to face such problem? Now, for example, somebody can say there's a flood. So, is it your own responsibility? So how can you respond to it? Actually, there can be many human-made reasons for a flood. But if we even keep those things aside, suppose a flood can arise due to natural causes and conditions. Now, the moment we understand that these things are caused by natural causes and conditions, then we learn how to cope with them. Now, Venerable, one very big, relevant example is something happened about now almost 20 years ago, the tsunami came. So when tsunami came, people, it was a kind of unprecedented experience for people. And then, different people gave different interpretations. And, the very popular interpretation was, the gods were angry and, things like that. However, now, when you look at many places, for example, we are coming from Sri Lanka. What happened in Sri Lanka? Of course, the tsunami came as a result of natural phenomenon of matter, which is, matter is also rupa. Matter is something existing in the world, and human beings don't have anything to do with that. So it's something. But then why tsunami hit particular places and not the other places? It's a human action. Now, for example, in Sri Lanka, most severely affected areas were where people had broken that barrier. And then, taken it that the pieces of that barrier to make other material. So those are the areas where it was hit. So in other words, the fact that tsunami came is a natural phenomenon. However, the fact that it hit some areas harder than the other areas is a result of human action. Now, this is where I think, Venerable, the causality, how things cause, has to be understood, because very often we think that, okay, nature is there, we can make use of it in any manner we like, so you become selfish, but then finally you have to pay for it. So therefore, this even remote problem like something happening in the seabed thousands of feet below, how it affects particular human beings. And then in countries where they had good monitoring system and the warning system, people didn't die. But in places where no such system was in place, people died. So the whole point is that nature functions naturally. However, whether we should get affected or not becomes our own decision.
And you are taking it in three ways. One is natural phenomena.
Right.
Second is people's mistakes.
Right.
Third is not being able to implement or not.
Correct.
So all these are causes and conditions and then that have relationship with the Patisamuppada.
The bad thing is very often we do not make that connection of a human factor. We think that it is due to the misfortune or something like that. But simply people don't see that. Now, for example, those people who travel. Now, I have a different experience. Whenever I was in Hawaii for several years, I was studying.
A place where tsunamis.
Yeah. I mean, tsunami is the word. Actually, tsunami is a very well-known word in Hawaii, because usually tsunamis come to the north part of Oahu, where the capital island is there, where we were practically every month. However, the interesting thing is, in North Shore, nobody dies as a result of that, because in Hawaii there is a warning system, and that warning system, every first day of the month, exactly at 12 o'clock, they test it. So if every first day of the month, 12 o'clock, if warning sirens goes, people know that this is only the test. But any other time, if the warning goes, people know that they have to get out of their place. So that warning system is there, it works. So, in other words, the point is, Venerable, tsunami comes and goes. But why should we get affected by that? It's the same thing. Now, Venerable, in a country like Sri Lanka, we get practically, naturally, couple of, the dozens of deaths due to elephant attack. Now, why this? And then, people have so many explanations, but simply because, if you intrude the habitat of elephants, and then finally, there is a conflict. But if you let elephants live where they live, and then if you live where you are...
Supposed to be.
Yeah. The
problem solved.
Exactly. I mean, the relationship is peaceful. So the whole thing is, the point I'm trying to make is, we need to understand the right reasons, right causes and conditions. Now, without looking at the right causes and conditions, without admitting our own, the error in that, we try to blame
others.
Yeah. So I think, Venerable, the whole point...
That's a default way of humans, actually.
Correct.
Picking up others,
Yes.
picking on others. Okay, so it's very interesting how you brought it to different aspects. Now, can we go to the contents of this beautiful concept?
Okay.
Now, Patisamuppada, as we understand, dependent, co-arising, causality, and there are many translations. And we particularly understand that there are 12 in place. But we also understand there are feedback loops and undercurrents. That means not that this is sometimes linear. Now, if you go to a sutta called Samma Ditti Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, it is said that not even avijja can be the starting point. How does avijja come from? Probably there is something else. They say asavas create avijja, and then avijja and asava become mutually constructive.
Right.
So avijja creates asava, asava creates avijja. This is one area. And sometimes we go to another, one set Nama Rupa and Vijnana, mind and matter and consciousness. Usually we understand Vijnana Pachya Nama Rupa. This is the Buddhist idea. There's a consciousness coming and taking the root in a body. But then if you look at a clone system, when someone is creating a clone, we see the other way around. It's not Vijnana Pachya Namarupang, it's Namarupa Pachya Vijnana. That means this part is also kind of, mutually probably constructive. So these 12 seem to be not always linear, but supposed to be linear. So with these undercurrent feedback loops, we need to understand these 12 one by one, not taking a lot of time, but very short. Let's start with avijja. Prof. Tilakaratana, we understand avijja to many people is lack of information, maybe lack of wisdom. But we do understand it's a deep misperception about the reality. We misperceive the reality. So how to understand avijja?
Right. Thank you. Venerable, just to respond to your earlier remark, the nature of the relationship, usually we understand a very linear type of relationship. But actually the relationship among phenomena is not something linear, even as I tried to say at the very beginning of the discussion. It's not like A causing B, B causing C type thing. Now the very good example in the Dhamma for this is actually this 24 conditions in the Patthana. Now if you look at 24 conditions in the Patthana, it's very beautiful. Now it has Anyamanya Pache, Natural, Sahajata, born alone with. Now there it shows that the relationship is not something linear. It can be mutual, it can be almost simultaneously born.
Let me explain to the normal audience. What the professor is saying, that this conditioning process is different. It's not that always conditioning happening is in one way. Conditioning happens in many ways. So that's 24 ways according to Abhidhamma.
So the interesting thing is, this is not the very simplistic way of something being caused by something. Actually, the whole thing is the Buddhism rejects the concept of no cause, and also Buddhism rejects the concept of one cause, because always there can be one particular thing, the leading thing, but of course there are so many conditions. Now, Venerable, not only for human suffering, now if you look at how Buddha explains visual perception, process of visual perception, or the auditory perception or whatever, chakkhuncha, paticca, rupecha, upajjati chakku vijnanam. So the chakku vijnana, eye consciousness, the knowledge I have when I see something, that's chakku vijnana. Now chakku vijnana arises due to factors, chakkuncha paticca, conditioned by eye. You have to have a eye and rupecha, in the presence of rupa. And then sutta shows only that. But of course, we know that subsequent literature shows not only that, you have to have light, you have to have other factors, and then you have to also have the attention for that. So when all these things come together, then the action called chakku vijnana, phenomena called chakku vijnana takes place. Now, although, there is nothing marvelous, I see something and I know, I see this bottle of water and knowing that it's a bottle of water. But it is so used to us. But then behind that so-called simplistic action, there is a psychology going on. How I came to know it as a bottle. If I never seen a bottle in my whole life, I will not get the idea of bottle. So it involves language, it involves my perception, it involves what I have read about it, and then I think that this round bottle and it's beautiful. Then, of course, my concept of beauty, where did it come? So, Venerable, in other words, it shows that, we are dealing with an extremely complex thing. Now, it's same thing for got into your second aspect of the question. Now, this process in the Paticsamuppada start with avidya, not knowing, ignorance. Now in the Paticsamuppada formula, this particular ignorance is described, defined as lack of knowledge of Four Noble Truths. Now it is not, according to Paticsamuppada, my lack of knowledge where a particular city is located or something about some kind of facts about the world. It's not that. It's basically something deep psychological state where I do not know how human problem of suffering arises. But then there may be so many other things that I don't know in the world. Buddha's idea was that you don't have to know everything. You have to know only what you need to know, because it is impossible for human beings to know everything. So in that sense, Buddha said that know what you need to know. Don't worry too much about beyond that. But then what we don't know according to this formula is, what we don't know is how suffering arises. So Buddha says that, okay, it is due to ignorance. Now, speculatively, philosophically speaking, there is a discussion among the religious people, philosophers. Okay, suffering start from avidya, ignorance. Now, how did ignorance start? Who started it? What is the beginning of ignorance? Now, for this question, Buddhism really doesn't accept that question, because according to Buddhism, this whole process is not a linear process, it's a circular process. Then, Reverend, interesting thing is, in a circular process, actually you can begin at any point. Now, for example, very often, now, even in the Buddha's teachings, although in the Paticsamuppada the formula begins with avidya, but in many discourses it doesn't begin with avidya, it begins with the immediate problem of craving. Now, for a person like Patachara came to Buddhism, problem doesn't start with avidya, problem is the immediate problem of enormous grievance. So Buddha start from there. But the fact that ultimately we are told that Patachara understood death and realized, then we see avidya and vidya there. So the Buddhist explanation of process in the Paticsamuppada, the formula begins with avidya. But as you said very correctly with reference to several discourses, of course in many discourses it doesn't begin with avidya. I think the reason is because Buddha's sermons are not like university lectures for a group of people like regular. Buddha taught individual people who came to him with certain problems. So Buddha started with that person's particular problem, not with set formula. But if you want to have a set formula, then you have the avidya paccaya sankhara. So my answer would be, Venerable, yes. But Samuppada formula is the most general, most complete formula. However, if you take individual discourses of the Buddha, they just talk about what is needed for that particular context. So that I think that would be the...
Interesting. That means the further teachings about, classifications about one concept is going to be one-fold, two-fold, three-fold, depending on the audience.
Right.
How it is to be given. All right.
And in very often, Venerable, the problem is like when you come to Buddhist literature reading anew, then you get perplexed. Okay, Buddha says here something, Buddha says here something.
Especially numbers, huh?
Yes. Yeah. And then, but when you are familiar with the teaching, you know that you can get into the ocean at any point.
Yeah, you don't mind about it. All right. Sankhara. Now we are going to Sankhara. It is said that avijja conditions Sankhara. What we understand in Buddhism is that Sankhara is such a very expanded process. And we do understand that Buddha's last advice is about Sankhatas, conditioned phenomena. But we do think that the Sankhara with regard to Paticsamuppada is more about conditioning, not condition. How conditioning is happening according to the Vibhanga Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 12.2. So how does conditioning happen? And conditioning, the overall conditioning, as we understand, karmic formations. So how does avijja lead to conditioning
Yeah,
process.
I think, Venerable, it is again a very interesting point you touched. Now, if we take again our human life, how are we to do things? How do we behave in our day-to-day life? How do we react to things? I mean, if you examine them, you can see that you are always reacting to things in a set manner. You have, made your life in such a way that you have to have bread and butter every day. So morning. But if you don't get that, then you become upset. Now, why? What is so sacrosanct about having a particular breakfast every day? Now, because that is your conditioning. So you go by that. Now, how did that conditioning arise? I mean, you can explain it, how it arose within this particular life. And then what happens is the bad thing, according to Buddhism, then you make it a rule for your life. I have to have this. I have to have this like this. So the whole thing is ultimately you are never able to get adjusted to any other situation. So this, condition, I mean, I'm giving you very minor example of our day-to-day life. Now, when we go deeper into this, we can see that ultimately how we react to things, how we react to people, how we react to situations. All these things are not innovative, Venerable, not creative. We just go for our set reactions. How we were told in school, how we were told by our parents, how we were told by even our religion, but we never question and think about them. So ultimately, Venerable, this avidya paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnana, consciousness. Now you can see that you become a victim of the routine. You just go on and on and on and on and in that. And then you expect everything to happen in certain manner. And then when you don't see that those things are not happening in the expected manner, then you get frustrated. It's like you don't get the exact type of cup of tea in the morning, so you get upset. Now, in the same manner, in our larger life also, when things don't happen. Now, disasters happen, problems happen, wars happen, and so many things. But the person Buddhism would envisage will be one who can really see the causes and conditions and how these things arise. And then, when with that understanding, ultimately, you are able to face the reality with the equanimous mind. You don't get upset. Otherwise, Venerable, in our day-to-day ordinary people, ordinary people can be, some of these people are big politicians or very rich people or, the very educated professors or whoever. But then at the slightest thing, why they get so upset about it? This is the issue. Now, the whole Buddhist point is when you know and when you see this reality, you are equanimous. Okay, is that so? Oh, this is how it happened. This doesn't mean that you don't have an initiative or you don't change. You will do all these things, but you will do those things with understanding. I think this is basically what I see in Buddhism.
This is what you are suggesting.
Yeah, and then now, for example, who was the Buddha? Who was an Arahant? Now, Buddha was the enlightened one. How did the Buddha react to the situations? Like, did he get upset? I think, Venerable, the whole point is that, when you know now there's one minor example when Buddha went in Pindapata, arms round, and didn't get anything. And then Venerable Ananda suggested that, no point being in this city, we should move into another city where, people will treat us better. Then Buddha very calmly asked Ananda, what if same thing happened in that city? Are we to move to another city? Are we to move to another city? What is that? Now you see, Venerable, there is this, what you call the equanimous reaction to the situation. And there what the Buddha said is, ultimately, Ananda, their problem arose here. We should settle that problem here. Move into some other places. I think, Venerable, ultimately, even to the Buddha, not that there were no problems or anything. Human life is fraught with problems. But whether you are to be devastated by that problem or whether you are to cope with that problem. Makes a difference between enlightened person and unenlightened
Now,
person.
going back to your example, you were giving us a very interesting one: bread and butter. Normally, people blame the objects. Say, even when they realize that why have I got addicted to a certain bread and maybe butter, maybe something like that. They are blaming the external things, not that their own conditioning about the bread and butter. So I think, as you said even just now, I mean, we can change the conditioning. Thereby, we can create very wholesome, holistic solutions for the problem. So you see sankhara as such. Interesting.
Venerable, when I say that, ultimately our own responsibility, that aspect has to be understood. Sometimes people might say that, okay, can you change the world with your own will or something? And if things are happening, you just be equanimous and, be calm and quiet. Is that the Buddhist solution? No, I would say no, it is not the Buddhist answer to this. I mean, at least what the Patissamuppada present. When you understand causes and conditions, properly, then you have the proper set of mind. It doesn't mean that you become kind of lazy or, settle down to something. No, I mean, you are still working. Now, again, if you take the life of the Buddha and the Arahant and, all these enlightened people, Buddha never stopped teaching, right? Buddha never stopped teaching. But does that mean that, 100% converted into Buddhism or something is teaching? No. I mean, Buddha knew the nature of the world, but he never gave up teaching up to the last moment. So, in other words, knowing the situation, knowing the reality of the world, then it is not a problem for you. So the Buddha was never, I think, frustrated about why people are, why not entire India is becoming my followers. I don't think Buddha had ever that. But on the other hand, it never stopped for him to teach. So one person, maybe two people, we hear that he walked so many miles only for one person. So I think there is no discrepancy between the action and understanding. But the person who understands, faces the life, I think, because I'm also saying this very often, as you also mentioned, thank you for the very elaborate introduction, social work. Now, very often people do social work and they get it very personally. And then when something goes wrong, I mean, it's not your work. So you think about your righteousness and then you expect so much from other people. And, I have seen that so-called good people becoming very frustrated, very angry. I mean, I'm not away from that. But what I'm trying to do is, okay, I do whatever I can do to, in an organization or society or among the people. But as long as I do the right thing and try to do try to do the right thing, I mean, I'm all right. Maybe I don't get 100% result. But that should not be a cause for me to get personally frustrated. But of course, at the same time, I keep on doing. So, this is a very mundane example, Venerable. Now, the point is like when we talk about human suffering in a very, very deep manner, ultimately human suffering according to Buddhism is, as Patissamuppada explains, the things we do and the construct, sankhara paccaya viññānaṁ, nama rupa, and then salayatana, 6 sensory perceptions. Now, all these things is ultimately you create a world in our day-to-day life. Now, salayatana paccaya passo. Passa is contact. Passa paccaya vedana, feeling. Now, feeling can be good, bad, and equanimous, the neutral. Now, if you take one minor example of, my seeing some object and thinking that it is really good and beautiful, and then getting attracted to it, now you have passa, contact, and passa paccaya vedana, and then you get, the feeling out of vedana paccaya tanha. Then you don't stop at that. You want to go behind it. You want to try to get that, grab it. Tanha paccaya upadana, and then bhava. Here you see bhava in the broad sense is bhava is the existence. At the same time, Venerable, bhava is now having seen some kind of beautiful object. Now, if I'm turning my car and going behind that particular woman or something, that is bhava. And then jati, jara, marana, I undergo suffering. So you can explain Paticcasamuppada formula to understand how suffering arises in this moment. Now, whole series of those things is the suffering arises in the sansaric sense. Without understanding how suffering at this moment, I don't think you can understand the sansaric suffering, because sansaric suffering is an extension of or larger manifestation of the same suffering I am undergoing at this moment. So in that sense, I think Paticcasamuppada provides a very, the basis for inner harmony and the inner purification. However, Paticcasamuppada form, the theory, as at the very beginning I try to say that Paticcasamuppada is not one among the Four Noble Truths and stuff. Either Paticcasamuppada has to be, what I really want to say is, either it has to be the basis, or it has to be below, or it has to be above, but not on par with other things, because it is not another virtue to be practiced. It is a thing to be understood. Now, very well-known example would be actually this comes in the commentaries. We talk about Kamma Niyama, Chitta Niyama, Dhamma Niyama. Now, what is this Niyama? Actually, Niyama refers to Paticcasamuppada type, natural principle. So the Kamma Niyama basically means how you do something good, you get something good, naturally. You do bad, you get bad. Nobody doing it, no agent, no executioner to do that. Same thing with nature. Moon rises, sun rises, and the seasons come. Nobody is doing it. It's the natural thing. Kamma Niyama, Chitta Niyama, mind. I see something beautiful, I get attracted. I don't have to tell my mind, okay, Asanga, now you get attracted to it. No. And then I see something which I consider to be dislike, I don't like it. So I am angry, in other words. So those things. Now, actually, these are areas where this natural causes and condition work. I think what the Buddha did is apply this particular process into human problem. Now, this is why Venerable Buddha says that Uppadava Tathagatanang, Anuppadava Tathagatanang, Titava, Sadhatu Dhammatitita. Whether the Tathagatas were to be born or they were not to be born, this particular nature has been in the universe all the time. So what the Buddha would do is to come and show it. It's exactly like I'm not saying that Buddhism is science or anything, but the theory of gravitation. Theory of gravitation is there whether we know it or not. But it took some genius to show it to us.
Find it out.
Yeah. In the same manner. So the Paticcasamuppada theory is happening everywhere in the universe all the time. What the Buddha did is to show that, look, not only Utu Niyama, Bija Niyama, Kamma Niyama, like natural processes, even for your suffering, you can apply the same natural process. I consider that as a very beautiful point in the teaching, actually.
Interesting. Professor Tilakaratana, I'm not going to ask one by one about the what you call components of this 12 parts, just due to the time constraint. But I wanted to pinpoint a couple of things, maybe ask from you. Now, one thing is that in one of the suttas we understand.
Which sutta?
In one of the suttas, probably we understand it from Samyutta Nikaya's Anyatitya Sutta. Arahant Sariputta says, the cause of dukkha is passa. So we understand here the contact. That means, now, say for instance, in our life, we are trying to stop our, I would say, get rid of our problems at different times. Sometimes we are, I think most of the quite often we are going to solve the problems when the problem is so grown up.
Right.
And we cannot do that much at that point. So, looking at how the Paticcasamuppada is stipulating, listing out these components, what are leading to the final dukkha, we can see that because we understand passa pacca vedana. That means
Right.
vedana also, feeling also arises as a consequence of
Passa. Yeah.
passa.
Yeah.
So if we can take care of our passa, how does passa contact works, how the contact touches us, then we can get rid of lots of unnecessary pains. That is what we see in the Patisamuppada. So how do you see this, the importance of contact? I think this is a very interesting point in Abhidhamma too.
Yeah.
They are talking avajjana. Avajjana.
How passa happens.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, Venerable, now again, if we take our sensory perception, the process of sensory perception, how do we see something, hear something, smell something, or feel something? Now in this whole process, actually passa comes into play with the sensory perception, with our relation to the world. Now for the example, when I see something, my chakku viññāna, or knowing that I see something, then leads to the passa. Now, I think the Buddhist position is that passa and then passa pacca vedana, this particular process, Venerable, cannot be stopped by anybody up to that point. Because the moment I see my eye, whether you are an ordinary person or educated person or an arahant even, I would imagine, you see something, then you recognize it, and it touches you. So the passa is there. In other words, passa you can't escape from. But then the issue is passa pacca vedana. So through passa you also vedana arises. Vedana also, I think, cannot be avoided. Vedana arises. But vedana pacca tanha. I think the important point is, Venerable, passa, vedana, these are natural process. But in the natural process,
involuntary, automatic.
Correct. And then, but the vedana, actually vedana pacca tanha, whether you generate tanha, craving. Tanha, the verbal meaning is actually Sanskrit term is trishna, which means thirst. You become thirsty. That means you want more and more and more. I think, Venerable, the difference between an ordinary person and arahant is that arahant does not generate tanha because of passa and vedana. Now, ordinary people like me, I don't know about you, ordinary people generate passa and then vedana, and then we naturally go to tanha. However, not only tanha, we know that along with tanha, dosa, raga, dosa, moha, mana, and all sorts of things follow from that. So I think the important thing is, now when Venerable Sariputta says passa, actually this controlling or the knowing factor can begin with anything. Now the moment you know that, okay, this is how it happens, then the moment you know it, you have a control over it. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that it solves the problem completely. Now, but the fact that the person knows, okay, this is what is happening now. Now, very often, Venerable, what happens to the ordinary people is they see and they get into passa, vedana, tanha immediately. I mean, there is no time gap between the process. But there are, people, understandably, when this process starts, they know that, okay, now this is what is happening in me. This is what is happening in me. Not only that, it's something like this. Okay, I like this object, and I know that I like it. That means, Venerable, two levels. My liking it is the emotional level, but my knowing it is a epistemic level. So there are two levels. Now, I would say that even by knowing that, the problem will not be solved. But of course, you are at the beginning of your solution. You know that. Then you have a choice. If you want to carry on,
and carry on.
Otherwise, if you want to divert it, it's something like this, Venerable. And personally, for me too, I notice something, I see something, and I know that something is working up in my mind, and I'm getting on the way to get angry. But I know that, if it goes like, I will be angry. But very often I try to stop at that. But when the process starts. But if I did not notice that, then I will be reacting. I'll be arguing, I'll be fighting, rushing, smashing, all types of things. So I think, Venerable, you're right. I mean, passa is a very important term, but I mean, important the stage in this whole process. So knowing passa, knowing what is going on is the beginning of the process. So, Venerable, I think I did not read that sutta lately, but I think what it says is ultimately you recognize the passa and then you deal with the passa. Otherwise, what happens is passa. I mean, Vedana is okay in the sense Vedana arises, but enlightened person, I think it doesn't become dukkha Vedana. Because usually sensory, what called impingement, this technical term, like the Abhidhamma term. Now it happens.
Advertence.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
So even for an Arahanto, any person who has an eye, this process happens. But the important thing is it never turned into tanha. Then tanha goes to upadana, bhava, jati, jara, marana, suffering. So for the Arahant, I think suffering stops at that point. In other words, I think Buddha very clearly says that, see, if you are a blind or if you are a deaf person, if your philosophy is not to get the objects into your visual field, then you will be a saint if you are blind. But Buddha says that no, nothing like that.
Then blind people should attain enlightenment faster than everybody.
Exactly.
Indriya Bhavana
So
Sutta, right?
The whole point according to Buddhism is not that you shut up your eyes or something.
Yeah.
Not that you shut up your, the world from your senses. Actually, the world exists because of our senses. If we don't have senses, world doesn't exist for me, for you. Of course, world will be existing, but it doesn't make sense. So my world depends on my perception. So in that sense, I think you can moderate it, regulate it. At some point, you can control it and know that this happens. So I think the whole point of, in that sense, Paticamuppada is to understand the process.
And now when we go through the conditioning process, Paticamuppada, after Vedana, as you said, Tanha is going to arise. Now, why is Tanha differently explained in Paticamuppada and in other suttas? Say, for instance, in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, Tanha is classified as Kama Tanha, Bhava Tanha, Vibhava Tanha.
Right.
But if we go to Vibhanga Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 12.2, we understand in particular, Tanha here means Rupa Tanha, Rupa Tanha, Saddha Tanha, Gandha Tanha, Gana Tanha, Juha Tanha, Pottabha Tanha, and Dhamma Tanha. We understand these are part of what you call sensual objects. So, say, I think we go back to our previous point, that means Buddha has explained differently. How does someone think how to practice the opposite of tanha, how not to create tanha, using these two teachings?
I think, Venerable, now when you say, Buddha said in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, Kama Tanha. Now, Kama Tanha is one word, but I think in the Vibhanga Sutta, Kama for the pleasures. Now, Kama Tanha arises due to these 6 sensory doors. So then you have tanha for rupa tanha, tanha for sounds, tanha for smell, and so it's a kind of elaboration of what kind of tanha Buddha was talking about. However, there Buddha, I think, tried to capture starting from very ordinary type of tanha we experience in our day-to-day life, more subtle. Now then, bhava tanha means for the continuation and the existence. Now, why someone wants to continue and exist? Ultimately, it refers to the Kama Tanha, because that is the basis. In order to enjoy Kama, we need to exist. But then, at some point, what happens is you can really distinguish between your desire for Kama and then your more overarching desire for Bhava, existence. So that I continue. So the continuation is very important. So the death becomes so fearful simply because you feel that your existence is terminated, and then so the bhavatanha, and then going to vibhavatanha again, very debatable thing, but vibhavatanha seems to be again in this set of mind ultimately how you get the non-existence as a very paradoxical thing where you desire non-existence. So that's a paradoxical thing in the sense connected with the destructive thoughts. So anyway, starting from kamatanha, pretty ordinary sensual experience of life, and then going deeper and deeper into the human psychology. Now that is kama tanha is being explained, rupa saddha gandha rasa and so on. However, Venerable, the important thing is we are talking about in a way to say, so to say, theoretical level, how this happens. But your pointed question was how Pasapaccha Vedana, Vedana Paccha Tanha, how not to go to Tanha from Vedana. I think, Venerable, that is where the long-term practice is needed. I mean, we are talking about, in a way, Lokiya Sammaditthi, very worldly right understanding. But worldly right understanding would not guarantee you the attainment. For that, I think that is precisely why Arya Atthangika Magga Noble Path start with Sammaditthi and Samma Sankappa. We know that although it start with Sammaditthi and Samma Sankappa, it is not only the beginning point, it's also the culminating point. We know Sila, Samadhi, Panya. But in the Eightfold Path, Panya, Sila, Samadhi. Now, so it should not be understood as, I think, that the culmination of Panya is there. No, it is not the culmination. Beginning point itself is Panya according to Buddhism. So which means that...
Maybe not the lofty Panya that somebody is attaining at the end. Probably a basic level of... Yeah.
In other words, Venerable, now practicing what the Buddha taught can be done in a very ordinary level. But of course, if we really practice in the deeper sense, I think this Sammaditthi is the beginning point, because that right understanding. So therefore, I think the practice has to be guided by Sammaditthi, but it has to be practiced. So the practice can take long time. So in other words, I am making a distinction between knowing the right thing and imbibing the right thing in you. So that's a cultivation. So that's the big difference.
Interesting. So we come to the last question now. I think we can you can actually include about universality of this concept into everything, and also the parallel concepts that we understand from the Paticamuppada, as well as, more importantly, question is about for the lay people, for the normal, ordinary people. What are the ways that they can incorporate Paticamuppada into their daily life, more than how they are accustomed, used to hear this about suffering? How to improve their daily happiness if they bring this Paticamuppada into their daily life with whatever they are thinking, understanding conditions and causes more and more, and creating lots of peace among family members, and creating lots of efficiency, effectiveness at work. So we can look at lots of things. So Prof. Tilakaratana, so how do you think that lay people, how can they improve, enrich their daily life with this beautiful concept?
I think, Venerable, that's a very important thing, and also very challenging, because there is no set formula or something, this is how
to do it.
But then depending on each situation, some of the fundamentals would be applicable. Now, for example, any situation would arise due to certain relevant causes and conditions. Now, very often what happens to us is we do not either see these causes and conditions, or we see wrong causes and conditions. We do not see the right causes and conditions. Now, for example, Venerable, let me try to take one or two examples. Now, sometimes, very often in our very competitive society, we try to do things, we work whole day, and, then finally we deal with our workplace work. You come home and you deal with your problems.
You become exhausted.
Exhausted, children and the wife or husband. And then finally, we kind of depressed. And then, the getting a very, in a way, personal experience. Sometimes there are days, I find in the morning I am not at all happy, or I am not at all normal. And then, things go on like that. You get up and you do routine things, but still you know that things are not right. And then, Venerable, the moment you think, okay, Asanga, what has gone wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Now, the moment I ask that question from me, and then I start counting, why I am angry? Why I am not this thing? Why it is? What is wrong with you? And then naturally it dawns upon me, actually, okay, that happened, this happened, or something. But then, things become gradually clear and clear. Within 5-6 minutes, I have graduated from that mentality. And okay,
is it because you asked that question from you?
Yeah,
Interesting. So that means one thing they can do is they can ask this question, a self-question.
Yeah, you ask it from yourself.
What has happened to you?
Yeah. Otherwise, what happens is, you get up in the morning and you are not normal, and you get angry, and you go to work and you drive and you get into trouble in the road, and you go to office and then you shout at people and
unleash that anger onto other people. Yeah?
But then if you raise that question, Asanga, what is wrong with you? Why? What happened? Then you will also see, okay, yesterday it happened and it made me a little bit angry, and so on. When you see that, this seeing, Venerable, makes you, you get into a different plane. So now the point is this. Why we can't question ourselves? Why we can't look at ourselves? Now, when the Buddha said that attanangavesayata, look for yourself, I think that's a very... Now, here the formula again is, I am not thinking about avidya paccaya sankhara, but I am thinking about causes and the conditions. What caused me? Why I am this? And then when I start seeing this, okay, this, then of course I feel that, okay, it's nothing, absolutely no problem, I shouldn't be worried about it too much, and so on. I give a feedback to my mind, and then I'm okay within 5-6 minutes. And this I say with my own experience, because, it happens. Again, there's no guarantee that it will not happen tomorrow, it will happen.
But you can re-question.
Exactly.
Question again.
So that is where I think Buddhism is helpful to me. Now, in the same manner, we can have office problem in office, or problem with your spouse, husband or wife, or your children. I think although this kind of looking at the causes and conditions and the situations will not give you a solution in a pill. It will be like that, but it always provides the basis for you to get into yourself.
Manage.
And then particularly being Buddhist, now for example, we talk about the metta, friendliness, meditation. I think, it's an enormously helpful thing. Enormously helpful. So usually, metta type meditation, you don't need to sit or anything like that. You can do it anywhere, even in the toilet, really, but when you are driving and, things like that. So I think now these are very mundane, ordinary ways of looking at things, causes and conditions. However, when it comes to more difficult, even more complex issues, I think Venerable, sorting out things and identifying the right causes and conditions is the beginning point of solving a problem.
And at the same time, understanding the right causes and condition will be the what do you call, the factor to progress in our life.
Correct.
Some people don't correctly understand the right causes and what do you call, conditions. So they understand the wrong conditions
Exactly.
and then wrong causes. and then they go to the downfalls. Right? Interesting.
I mean, very often you can see that, sometime, you go to a, the get together with a friends or, party or something, and then, okay, you see your child is talking to somebody, and then next time your child does something, you say that, oh, because of so and so, this happened. I mean, how can you decide like that? How can you judge it like that? But simply we go that kind of things. We say, okay, sometime, I mean, again, taking example from context of Sri Lanka, it can happen anywhere. A child from village area comes to the city, and then something happens that parents did not expect. And then always try to put the blame on some particular thing. Okay, in Colombo, he was associated with this person. In there, of course, it can be one reason, but without knowing exactly what happened, we draw conclusions. And then those conclusions are very often, but then we continue with that wrong assumption, and then, Now, Reverend, these are some of the, possible ways of looking at this deep philosophical thinking. But what we need to do is, Paticamuppada will not tell you, if you take one particular incident, how it caused, but it will tell you the general way how things happen.
Solid.
And then also particularly how you are part of the problem. Because very often we don't see ourselves as the part of the cause. We think always we keep ourselves out and we try to identify the problem in other people. But no, you yourself have been the problem. So what is your role in the problem? So Venerable, I think the very important thing is to be objectively, we talk about in scientific research, objectivity, but one thing applicable to us is like, if we can put ourselves distance and look at, if we can do that. Now Paticamuppada type training will allow you to do that. You can also put yourself also distantly. And then there are so many factors. Then you look at, okay, then you see that, okay, I myself have played the role, but of course other person has done this thing, other person has done this thing, and this is my role. Then of course you are in the right perspective. There you are in the right path, but still you have to do a lot of things to correct the situation. So Paticamuppada will not give you those things. It's up to you. But Paticamuppada provides you with the right understanding. I think that is the beginning of the solution of the problem.
Interesting. So on the other hand, as you mentioned, that when someone is understanding Paticamupada's context, all these things, that person will not put other people as culprit, and also looking at where am I in this problem, and trying to introspect, and then trying to find a very, holistic approach to solve the problem. Interesting.
Correct. There are many factors. Other person can also be a factor, definitely. But of course, when you put that in a particular context, you see properly, okay, this is this person, this what happened, and here I am. So then
you understand the overall picture,
exactly.
the bigger picture.
And then working on that, that courage is something very important provided. I think, Venerable, ultimately Buddhism, the whole point that Buddhism takes Paticamuppada to some kind of inner understanding, knowing your own capacity, role, and that aspect makes things much better.
Much better. All right. So, Professor Tilakaratana, can you conclude probably in a minute or two about what you want to say overall, maybe the things that you could not explain so far in a question.
Okay.
So we will, please conclude.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this occasion. Actually, the one thing, that comes up with this whole discussion is, very often we do not try to, society does not try to make use of the teachings of the Buddha to the extent that we are trying to make use of our practices, rites and rituals and things like that. Actually, performing rites and rituals and, puja and everything is very important. Lighting oil lamps, these things are very important, I personally, myself, and I encourage others to do. But at the same time, to make use of this great teaching, rather than making them, very abstruse, abstract, and, far away from us. In other words, worshipping Paticcasamuppada will not be the right attitude. So the right attitude will be understanding what the Buddha tried to say from this. Now, for example, when the Buddha talked about the sansaric suffering and taught Paticcasamuppada how it arises and ceases, of course, he was talking about a very deep psychological thing. But how did Buddha, as the Prince Siddhartha, was motivated by that? He was motivated by looking at the society he lived, looking at the old age, disease and death. Now, when Siddhartha saw this old age, it is not simply an old man walking on the road. The plight of the old people in that society, they are on suffering. They are suffering within the family, and then the disease, and then the living problems, and then finally you succumb to death. So then Siddhartha, to see these things and come out from those things to find the doctrine, I think that is the most important thing, where the Paticcasamuppada was to get rid from suffering. So now here we are talking about, okay, maybe we don't want to attain nirvana right in this life and, complete everything. But definitely we need to live a better life. Definitely we need to live a life with more compassion, more love, more caring, Now, how do these things come into our life? Those things come into our life, according to Buddhism, by understanding reality, by understanding other people, by understanding how the world, the people do things, by understanding yourself, by understanding your relation. Now, for all these things, I think these causes and conditions and knowing that is the fundamental and the basis. So from that, of course, there are other things. Then you have to practice metta, you have to, all things are there. But my understanding is that Paticcasamuppada understanding provide the basis. Based on that, of course, there are other things to do. Would that be?
Yeah, that makes so much clear. Thank you very much, Professor Tilakaratana.
Thank you very much.
Dhamma friends, today I was joined by Professor Asanga Tilakaratana, who's an emeritus professor at Department of Buddhist Studies at University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. His final remarks at this point, they were very interesting. Do not worship Paticcasamuppada. Of course, respect, venerate, and then, do the necessary respect for all these things. But do not worship Paticcasamuppada. Rather, use it as a training within oneself to understand yourself, solve problems. We should be thinking critically, and we should be able to solve our personal, social problems in our best ways. Thank you, Professor Asanga Tilakaratana, for joining
here. It's a good opportunity. Thank you.
So we're wishing you good health and succeed definitely in future research endeavors. And you have not stopped writing, giving seminars, workshops, lectures. We would see that you would do more and more in the future when we come here again and again. And Dhamma friends, so here we are going to wind up our 10th dialogue session on the BME Dhammadana series. Professor Tilakaratana will be giving 2 talks in the coming days, probably this Friday and Sunday. So stay tuned to those talks. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thank you.